This podcast is brought to you by Mapper Forward's new Patreon community, the Global Coffee Think Tank. Check the show notes or head to patreon.com/Mapper Forward to find out how you can become a member today. If somebody came and took all their money.
Yep.
If somebody came and took away their ability to be able to earn.
Yep.
If somebody hacked the Cropster, which is, or Loring, these are systems that run your roasting machines.
Yep.
You know, the coffee industry thinks, but why would Russia want to do that? Why would anybody want to do that? Well, because it's valuable to you and it holds a whole industry at their knees, and people just simply don't get that.
Yeah, I think it's in terms of the real, so those are certainly potential, I think, vectors, right? If you can take out, if there's 2 or 3 key pieces of software that the entire industry relies on, those are going to be targets of people.
Yep.
And that we see this in the industry a bit. It's called, we think of supply chain in terms of physical supply chain,
oil
but yeah, all that's just, getting the beans from the grower to the roaster, all these kind of things, right? So that's the, your logistical supply chain. But we think about in the software security space, supply chain attacks in our world is software supply chains. So
right.
you have a piece of software that you rely on. If, like you say, so this happens commonly. This is a bit too commonly, but we've seen in the past some really high-profile companies that have software that is used inside a lot of companies to, let's say, maintain their networks in some way. Rather than hacking all those companies, I just hack upstream. I hack the company who supplies the software. I modify the software in some way. Then when people update, I get inside their company, and then I can decide what I want to do from there. So, and this is a kind of common for quite advanced actors such as nation state. This is it happens. For your average person now, this is probably something that your average coffee roaster, that your average cafe, all this stuff, they're not going to be able to do much against. The stuff that they can do stuff against, are things like ransomware. These are the things you are more likely to be dealt with. So, what Security Square has in place is kind of outside their controls, but things that they can control is certainly within their business, right? So we talked about ransomware before, and I think this is, as you mentioned, right? If someone manages to break into your let's say one of your employees clicks the thing, something they shouldn't, gives someone a vector into your network, and they spend half a day looking around to find what they can find, and they notice that, you're actually storing all your really important documents and everything on a maybe a server or a machine, physical machine in your company. That's a great target for ransom. You need that stuff to do your day-to-day business. If they say, pay me $5,000 and I'll unlock it, probably going to do it, right? Or if you have your credentials for your website lying around, how much are you going to pay someone who takes your website offline because you can't do online transactions anymore?
Right.
And they're just going to hold your website to ransom.
And this is where it goes to the heart of, by the way, welcome back to the Daily Coffee Pro, everybody. We've been rolling and talking for a second. We've got Matt McCormack for episode 2 of our 5-episode series on cybercrime and protecting your business against being hacked. What you were just talking about there, Matt, was this really goes to the heart of how small to medium businesses can be affected by all of this. And while a lot of the coffee industry don't seem to think that they have to worry about this because they've got nothing that anyone could really want, it's about halting production or halting business until you're prepared to pay the money. It just gets acceleratingly more challenging to keep up with business when
Yeah.
you do finally get hacked. So can you define ransomware, please?
Sure. So the ransomware I think we would define as ransomware, combination of ransom and software.
Yeah.
It is software that cyber criminals will deploy to encrypt your files or your machines or whatever it may be, in order to render them useless unless they unlock them, and they're only going to unlock them if you pay a ransom. And typically that is in the order of some amount of bitcoins. Usually it varies depending on the target. So larger companies such as oil companies and other things have been targeted before, and their ransom is in the order of millions. If you're a small to medium business, you may, as we discussed before, let's say you don't get targeted specifically, you just kind of get unlucky because someone clicks a link or someone one of your employees, their email addresses and password got compromised on some other website. They use that same password at work, and we'll talk about password reuse and stuff later. But it could have gone unlucky. Somehow, someone in your company runs one of these things, and then they're inside. They find the important stuff, and then they ransom it, or they find they get on the machine of the person who maintains your website, and they can hold that to ransom. And this stuff happens really, really commonly. I can't emphasize that commonly enough. And I think you from your perspective in the coffee industry, you're noticing that people aren't taking this seriously. Mm-hmm. From someone who works with lots of different companies, I tell you, most people don't take it seriously, and it's unfortunate. And it's usually to their detriment, unfortunately.
So do we call ransomware a threat model? Is that one example of a threat model?
So the way we apply a threat model is how we try to use a threat model as a way to understand what are the risks that you are likely to face. So, so for example, for your average person, a threat model, what is in scope and out of scope, right? So, well, let's use Jeff Bezos as an example. Okay. Jeff Bezos is a high-profile individual. His threat model, the amount of different kinds of threats against his person in terms of cyber threats, is vastly different to you or I. Yep. For example, we all know that most people know that Jeff Bezos had an affair, and that he's now divorced. Mm-hmm. What most people don't know is how that information came to light. So in 2018, Jeff Bezos and the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia had struck up a friendship, and were exchanging messages over WhatsApp. And
this is an amazing story.
So Bezos was sent a video file, seemingly innocuous video file
on WhatsApp, right?
That he via WhatsApp that he ran on his phone. Thought nothing of it. Turns out that was using a vulnerability, as we discussed, or an exploit for a vulnerability that was on his phone, and they were able to get remote access to his phone and grab a whole bunch of stuff off. Sometime later, Jamal Khashoggi of the Washington Post was brutally murdered. This is in the order of months later. Jeff Bezos owns
Washington Post?
Jeff Bezos owns Washington Post. And then we note that once Washington Post and other news outlets were did not take kindly to this kind of activity, and were rightfully calling out murdering of journalists as not a great thing. Mm-hmm. Someone dumped all of the information about Bezos's affair to I think to tabloids or whatever it may be. Mm-hmm. Information that came off his phone. So this is I think it's an interesting example of a threat model that you or I don't have to deal with, because the vulnerability that was exploited on the market, that's probably worth $1 million, right? So someone who has the money to be able to kind of burn that kind of that bug on someone like Bezos is not going to spend that kind of money to deal with your average person. Now, there are third-party sort of clandestine hacking companies who will work on behalf of governments, and they would typically target, journalists in unfriendly countries, for example, to try and get on their phone. Journalists generally quite savvy to this stuff nowadays, thankfully. was it two Winter Olympics ago or 3 Winter Olympics ago, and all the journalists turned up in Russia, and all of a sudden they basically just had burner phones.
Burner phones.
They
did the same thing in China this time.
yeah, exactly. So it's like they just know, like, all right, this is just, they're going to turn up to the airport, and there's going to be 200 Wi-Fi's of like free Wi-Fi. Please join me. So not to digress too much, but the threat model for Jeff Bezos is very different to you or I. So when we think about the average person, so the average individual, which I think is important, and a lot of this then applies to small and medium businesses, there's really a handful of things that are within the threat model that are likely to occur more often than not. Being targeted by Saudi princes, unlikely. Being accidentally or intentionally hit by ransomware, social engineering scams, or being a victim of your password reuse, using the same password for more than one thing, are the likely things that are going to get you. So let's start with password reuse.
Yes.
Password reuse, everyone does it. There is a very useful website you can go to. It's Have I Been Owned, but owned with a P because of internet memes anyway. So have I been owned, or have I been pwned? You can go there and put in your email address, and it will show you what databases from various companies you have been exposed via. So for example, let's just to name a few in the last few years that have been hacked. If you use Canva, Dropbox, LinkedIn, MyFitnessPal, MySpace, Tumblr, or Zynga, who make Words with Friends, and you put your email address.
My
and
face
is
showing shock right now because I live on Canva, first of all.
Yeah, they got hacked in 2019, and all their username and passwords got dumped. So anyone who uses these software, right, at some point may have had their password and the combination of email address and password compromised. So what that means is, as we talked about the cybercrime underground, right? Someone does the hacking, they might sell or publicly close this database of all these email addresses and passwords. That goes to someone else who have an infrastructure set up to try this list of passwords and email combinations against top 1,000 websites that might be useful. Amazon, any kind of online shopping, banking, frequent flyer is an interesting one. Anything that could be valuable to someone, and then they kind of package it up, and then they sell that and say, hey, look, I've got this person over here whose email address and password combination gets you into X. And let's say that you signed up with your work email account on one of these websites, and you haven't changed your password. This is one way that people might have got in to your company then, right? Because there's millions of passwords and email address combinations just floating out there now.
So your personal Gmail account may potentially give somebody a way into your corporate emails or whatever.
I mean, assuming you use the same, let's say that, in my example before, right? Let's say that you signed up to LinkedIn, right? LinkedIn was hacked many moons ago. But if you were to sign up with your work email and password, and you use that same password for your work stuff, right, to log into your work computer, then
yes, that's a vulnerability.
Well, that might be a way that someone uses to get into your company, deploy ransomware, or do whatever it is they want, right? One of many different ways. So, to come back to your kind of thesis about people don't think it's going to happen to them. It's not directly that this stuff happens often. It's indirectly, right? It's via a hack of some other company. Then you don't have password changing policies for your employees, and then you kind of end up being done by accident.
What's the incentive? I know that sounds like a rather naive question, but I would assume that it's always the incentive is money. Is it always money?
Sometimes money, or kind of showing off your technical prowess for some of these people.
Wow.
It's varied, but I mean, you could probably say money is often. Some people do it and then will disclose, ostensibly under the guise of some kind of a public service or something. I mean, there's a lot of people have different motivations, but at the end of the day, this stuff happens, right? I mean, I have a burner email account that I use for just stuff that I, sign up for. And it's been involved in, like, I just put that in the Have I Been Pwned website, and it's been involved in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20.
Wowzers.
20 different breaches of, one of them, for example, CD Projekt Red, who make a really fun game called The Witcher. They got done in 2016, 1.9 million accounts. Let's have a look. The Citibank, remember this big Citibank password dumps? That was 226 million email addresses. There was some unverified collection that got put on the internet of 2.7 billion records, 773 million unique email addresses alongside passwords. I mean, the numbers are staggering, right? So
wow.
And this is why you don't use the same password for more than one thing.
Well, the first thing I'm going to do when we get done is go and change all of my fucking passwords.
Yeah. So, and the way to avoid this is use a password manager, right? So there's a handful of different password managers. It's software that is designed, and it'll have a browser extension. There's an app, and it makes it easy to just kind of go to your password vault, and it'll automatically generate passwords for you when you sign up to a new website. And they're all random, and I don't know most of my passwords. I know one password to get into my password vault.
But what if the password vault gets hacked?
Right. So that has happened to some of the vendors before, and nothing happens, because what's stored on the password vault's servers is an encrypted blob that only my password decrypts. So they can't see my passwords either. You'd hope, or else that's a pretty bad business model. So the only thing you really need to remember then is one, hopefully very strong and password that decrypts your password vault, and then you're good to go. Then you just
What are some password vaults?
So, for example, there's LastPass is one of them. Now browsers have got that stuff, like if you use Chrome or Edge or Safari. But yeah, look, password manager is really important, I think, because otherwise you're just not going to remember them, right? And the other thing is I would encourage people to do is use a passphrase, which is instead of like a password, we've been trained to be using these passwords like, I'll exchange a number for a different letter, and then no one will know how to hack it. And that's now not very secure. So a passphrase, like a 2 or 3 words that you'll remember,
like daffodils smell nice.
Or fat dog couch.
Okay.
Light.
Something that doesn't make sense.
Light, with some and maybe they're all capital letters with spaces. You can use spaces in your password. It makes it quite hard. Really? In most websites let you. Some of them don't let you because they're annoying. But spaces count as one of those, special characters, right? So you can just type a phrase, and then and then it's way easier to remember, and also way easier to kind of you can look at your password manager and it says, let's say, like, browser wall window floor, and you'll be like, oh, cool, and then you can type that in and you're good to go, and it's easier to remember than like 4G lowercase I 00 V, and it's more secure because it's really the length of the password that matters. It's not whether or not it looks complex.
Yeah, wow.
So there's another good website, and we'll put this in the show notes, userpassphrase.com. And it lets you generate passphrases, but most importantly, you can download the website onto your desktop. So it's all not online, and the author has no way of knowing what password you're generating. And you can keep it entirely offline and just use it to lazily generate passphrases if you want.
Sounds awesome.
Yeah, or you can just use your password manager, your password vault, which will do it for you.
Okay.
It usually generates really complex, hardcore ones, but it doesn't matter because you just kind of copy pasting them into things, or it's automatically doing it for you, so it doesn't really matter. So yeah, that's kind of number one, I think, that people don't realize. Password reuse, bad. And then two-factor, setting up two-factor as much as you on as many things as you can. So two-factor being passwords is something you know, two-factor is something you have, being text messages or those apps, the authenticator apps on your phone or elsewhere. That's the second factor, right? The second authentication factor. So you know your password, but you need to have access to something that has the second way of verifying you. So texts, on your banks, and email is most important, because emails can be used to reset
for
passwords.
Crypto, everybody remember to do that.
Or use an offline wallet or something.
The amount of people who have crypto,
right? Because,
go ahead. Well, the amount of people who have crypto and don't do two-factor authentication, I just don't understand it. Like, once it's gone, it's gone. So it's a bearer instrument. Anyway, I'm very into researching that right now.
Two-factor, absolutely. And it's so easy. Most places, like any place worth their salt, kind of enforce that now, which is good. But then that brings us to kind of social engineering, which is really going to be the other major issue that people run into, right? So
can we leave that for the next episode? Because I think that's a very interesting one, because coffee people, being the loving, community-focused folk they are very susceptible to social engineering. So let's leave that to the next episode. Peace, love, and peanut butter, everybody. Have an amazing rest of your day. Thanks, friends. If you enjoyed this video, here's what you should check out next. Consider supporting Map It Forward on Patreon, and be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell before you leave.